Hi, everyone. This is David Mallon here, your co-host on Capital H and Deloitte Human Capital's head of research. On this episode of Capital H, we're joined by Kirstin Starodub, part of our human capital practice, Venu Tirunee from Cisco, and Cliff Jurkiewicz from Phenom. Together, they're going to explore how talent intelligence is transforming the way organizations attract, assess, and hire talent. You'll hear about Cisco's talent acquisition journey, the role of technology and change management, and how companies are preparing for a skills-based future. Let's dive into the conversation. Next voice you hear is Kirstin's.
I'm Kirstin Starodub from Deloitte, and I'm excited to be here today with Venu Tirunee and Cliff Jurkiewicz from Phenom. And we're here to talk about talent intelligence and the broader talent acquisition trends that are shaping the future of work, including the story of the implementation journey that Venu and his team at Cisco have been on. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining today. Maybe if I could, first of all, get you to share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Kirstin, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Cliff, great to meet you. Again, my name is Venu Tirunee of Cisco. In case you guys are wondering, that is a shorter version of my name. I don't think we have time for the full name. I'm with Cisco, like Kirstin mentioned. I am part of the people strategy and operations team, where I lead the delivery and enablement of some of their key strategic initiatives. And we're going to talk about one of them today.
Hi, I am Cliff Jurkiewicz. Thank you, Kirstin, for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate that. And my role is really interesting. I actually have three parts to my role. As head of strategy is the first part. The second part is a chief evangelist. So I get to do a lot of speaking about the industry and the domain that we serve. And my last is general manager of our customer advisory, which is probably the most exciting part of my job because I get to interact with our executive clients every day about where this industry is going, what's working, what's not. And for me, that is the most rewarding part of my job.
And Cliff, I know we may not have time to tell the audience today, but I love your side jobs too, being a traveling musician and pilot. So for those that get to meet Cliff, I ask you to ask him some of those stories sometimes. Well, let's start and talk a little bit about this journey that we're on together. Venu, maybe if you could offer, why did Cisco start this project? What were the key drivers that you were thinking about as you embarked on the talent intelligence journey?
Sure. So first of all, Cisco is an AI-first company. So we are completely changing how we actually build our products, how we go to market, how we provide our customer support. And when we talk about how we are changing ourselves, a key part of it is also how we are going to change our talent to support. And there are multiple parts of the talent intelligent conversation. The first one is how we bring the talent in through talent acquisition, how we actually manage the talent and performance management and so on and so forth. And finally, learning and skills and bringing it all together with data and insights. So at Cisco, we are working on all of these items. But today, we'll talk about one of these initiatives, which is the talent acquisition transformation, or we fondly call it the hiring optimization, which we'll go a little bit deep into.
That sounds great. Cliff, from your perspective, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Cisco's journey and how that might compare with what you're seeing more broadly in the market.
I think the first thing, Cisco's unique just in the sense of how AI forward they are. So that comes in as is not only being fluent in the technology, but understanding the importance of bringing AI in to make a more adaptive operation. And that, to me, what we call innovation readiness is really a pillar of why we wanted to partner with Cisco and be some of the underlying technology, not the only one, but some of the underlying technology. I think what's important for us in aligning with the broader marketplace is the idea of really focusing on two things. That's automation and using the tools to automate the things that should be automated and create more human value in work itself. So those redundant, repetitive things that can be better done by technology, allowing the human beings to really expand their roles within the operation and sort of explore and experiment a little bit. We'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. The second side of it, I think, is just the intelligence side. AI has the opportunity to really collate, contextualize, and label intelligence in a way that's never been available before. And so the ability to aggregate intelligence from all these different areas and then make it specific to a person sitting in a chair or in a role, to their job, to their business goals, so that they can actually make really good decisions is what's important. So intelligence and automation are big drivers, but working with Cisco, the ability to bring that to market for Cisco very quickly is actually kind of unique.
And Cliff, you touched on something, Venu, I'd love to get your perspective on. You mentioned you wanted to be the partner for Cisco in this journey. Venu, you've often shared with me that Cisco is not looking just to select a solution or a technology, but a strategic partner, both in Phenom and then in Deloitte as your implementation partner. Why was that such an important part of the consideration, both for your Deloitte as your implementation partner and to have a strategic partner in Phenom?
So first of all, what we are trying to do with all parts of talent intelligence is go on a journey. When we talk about a journey, we also have to make sure that we have the right partners with us because we also want to go on a journey with them. So choosing Phenom was a very, very important part for a couple of reasons. Number one, they are market leaders and how they actually think about talent broadly. Number two, their product in the company was built ground up as an AI company, which makes such a big difference. And we know that they have a very strong roadmap. So choosing Phenom was part of all of these considerations. And the main reason why we brought Deloitte in, or the reason why we have to pick a very strategic vendor, is number one, not only just to tell us what things we should work on, but more importantly, things we should watch out for, right? We can find things, best practices in a lot of different places, but understanding how it is being done with other clients, some of the areas that we have to watch for, and actual practical experiences, how they've done with other clients is going to be key.
I think that's awesome. And I know that we often talked about how our other organizations do it, both from a perspective of lessons learned, but also opportunities and maybe wanting to do things not necessarily the same way everyone else in the industry is doing it. Cliff, from the Phenom perspective, how do you see Phenom's role in complementing implementation partners and their approach, like our approach with Deloitte and our strategic partnership, as well as what the clients and the customers like Cisco need?
Well, it really is a true partnership in every sense of the word or the phrase. You really have to, and for us, both Deloitte and Phenom, and we're in a strategic alliance and have been for a little while now, the idea that our focus really isn't about us. It's about delivering that solution, really understanding, in this case, Cisco's business, and making sure that we're aligned in every possible way with that. But also being a good partner is coming in and saying what you view as potentially being a challenge and looking at those risks, because every organization is going to be different and there's a learning curve to all of that. I think for us, working with Deloitte gives us the credibility of working with what is the most reliable human capital practice in the world. And so as much as we bring our experience to Cisco, we're also learning from Deloitte at the same time about how to work with an organization like Cisco, because it's very complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and being able to navigate that successfully is what a real good partnership is about.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's what's been so fun for me personally in working with the two of you and your organizations is we do all look at each other as one team, and we're all here for the same outcomes and reaching the strategic goals that Cisco has. And how can we bring our best experiences and capabilities in the roles that we play to do that along the way? Why don't we go into a little bit of the specifics that you were talking about earlier? I know from a market perspective, we often categorize these type of initiatives as a talent acquisition transformation. At Cisco, you, with intention, refer to it as a hiring optimization opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about that initiative and specifically how that's a part of the overall talent intelligence roadmap?
Sure, glad to. So first of all, we are still in the process of implementation. We are actually going live in November. We are really looking forward to coming back in a year again, sit with all of you and discuss what we've achieved since go live. But let me start off with what were the main business drivers for the hiring optimization. This was not just a tech implementation. At Cisco, we never approach anything as just a tech implementation. It is always, number one, a business outcome change, a business transformation. Item number two, it is a change agent to how we actually work. And only then tech is a driver to achieve these two goals. From a hiring optimization perspective, there are three main buckets of drivers that we initiated on this particular project. The first one is our talent brand in terms of how we are actually going to elevate our entire experience for the candidate. We want the candidate to look at Cisco in a completely different way. So we wanted to change that entire perception, number one. Second one are processes within the recruiting organization we had a lot of areas we needed to improve on. So we did not have a candidate relationship management system. We did not have an opportunity to do structured interviews. We did not have a way to do automated scheduling. So there were lots of pockets of places within the recruiting process that we needed to emphasize. So that is driver number 2. Driver number 3 is we also wanted tech that would not only give us and close the gaps of where we are right now, but also get us ready for the future in terms from a data insights perspective, in terms of keeping up with what is coming in the industry perspective. So these were the 3 main drivers from a hiring optimization perspective. Now, going into a little bit more detail on what exactly are we doing. So we are moving from our current applicant tracking system to a new architecture, which is a combination of Workday and Phenom. Think of the design where Workday bookends the entire process. You start the job requisition process in Workday because that is your primary HRIS, and it has your organization information, it has all the approval rules, and then it gets sent to Phenom, where the entire candidate and the recruiting process takes place, from the interviewing, from the feedback, and everything. And when the final candidate is identified, it goes back to Workday for offer letter, onboarding, and then they become employees. So that at a very high level is a scope of what we are trying to do with this.
Cliff, I'd love your perspective on what stands out in Cisco's story and then kind of broader industry trends. And how might this concept of a journey play into this in the way Cisco is thinking about it, where they're starting with the hiring optimization and then considering that part of the broader talent intelligence journey?
Sure. And I think TA is a great place to start because I think the way that Cisco looks at it is look at the breadth of products and services that Cisco is offering and the innovations that are coming to market. The faster you can get people into your organization that help you drive that innovation internally means more products and services to serve Cisco's audience, right? So the idea is really that TA is driving revenue. It is a direct driver of revenue. And so I think from that perspective, it's important, and I'll use this phrase, is to build a practice. And I'll extend that phrase a little bit and say, using a platform to build that practice or platform as a practice is really important. And I think Cisco's taken that on. Though those are my words. That's how I contextualize what's happening at Cisco. But the idea is that the combination of Phenom and Workday is through TA as sort of the initial lens, but then you open up that aperture to other parts of the talent ecosystem and you build the practice in TA and you repeat it throughout the talent ecosystem. And it becomes repeatable and reusable. And that's a really important piece because and we'll probably hit on this a little bit later, but we talk about how roles are going to change, how operations are going to change, how structure is going to change. Well, in a way, a lot of this practice is experimentation, finding out what's working and what's not working very, very quickly, iterating on that, and then continuing to do that experimental process. And so I think that's what Cisco is on. That particular journey really is one of building a practice and experimentation.
I like that concept, platform as a practice. I think that's a really great way to connotate how organizations can continue to think about this as a journey. You touched a little bit on role changes and some of the things beyond the technology. Venu, can you talk a little bit about the importance of change management and adoption coming into this? I know we touched on that this wasn't just about designing and implementing technology. It wasn't just about data collection. Why is this so much more than technology implementation? And how does driving adoption become a critical element of this journey?
So like I mentioned, change is one of the key drivers for everything that we do at Cisco. And to Cliff's point, if you're going to approach this as a practice, let's talk about what this means. Ultimately, the practice has to be done by the people in the company, which means that they have to understand exactly what we are trying to do and how we are planning to achieve this. So that is where change comes in as a very, very important factor on the success of how we transform our process and our business as well. How did we approach this at Cisco? We made sure our change team was engaged at the very, very early stages of the project. If you remember, Kirstin, when we were actually doing the global design sessions in Atlanta, we had the change team right there, discussing the change, understanding how the individual design decisions were going to impact the different personas of the project, right? Whether it's going to be a candidate persona or the hiring manager persona or the interviewer persona, we actually approached this very early on with a change in mind. And as the project went along, we continue to look at change both as an enterprise-facing thing, but also internally organizational-facing. And it's come up really well, and we are very, very excited about the November 10th collide that is going to happen.
Were there any innovative ideas or methods that you saw come to light during this journey that maybe are different than what you've taken in other initiatives?
I'll first start off with the lessons learned from this initiative, and then I'll go into how we're actually solving for those lessons using some innovative approaches. The first one is at Cisco, we always approach change from a project-by-project basis. And we understood that it has certain limitations. Because an employee, a manager, or a leader does not care about what initiatives are going live and when are they going live. They're just worried about what this means for them and how it is going to impact their day-to-day work. So one of the lessons learned is it is not important that we do a project-based change management approach. We have to transition to a persona-based change management approach, and we are working towards that. The ideas that we are bringing up to support that, not only in this initiative, but in the future, is we are actually creating a change agent network, a change champion network. So we are bringing in people from across the different parts of the business who are actually becoming champions for both directions, both in terms of translating what we are doing to their business constituents, but also giving us feedback. So that is number one. The second thing that we are working on, which we are trying to do, is we are looking to also build a change virtual agent, where we are always short-staffed in the change management space, as we all know. But when managers and leaders have some kind of a question on how a change is going to impact them and what they need to be prepared for, we are thinking about an agent that can answer the first 30% of the simpler questions. And when it becomes a much more complicated questions, it gets transitioned to an actual change agent. So those are some of the things we are working on.
I want to comment on that. I was going to jump right in with that and sort of do a fast follow on a couple things. When I hear you talk about this, some things come to mind for me. The first is, he talks about Cisco being AI first. And I want to dispel a misnomer about what that actually means. It doesn't mean that we're putting the technology before people. Actually, it means, and in Cisco's case, this is 100% true, they want to create more value in the human work, which means, can we look at AI to do some of these things that humans do today that are of little to no value to the human being or to the organization, right? And so AI first just means we look at that as a solution to solve problems in the organization so that we can open up the aperture for human work, which I think is really important. The second thing that I hear when I hear talk about this is, he calls it change management. I'm going to call it innovation readiness, meaning looking at an innovation like artificial intelligence, like agents and generative AI, we're all just starting to really learn about the value that they can bring to an organization. But what Venu and Cisco are doing is really conditioning their human performers in the organization to be ready for the next thing that's coming down the road. And the more you're able to adapt and be agile with what those things are, apply them into your organization, the faster you're going to grow and scale based on those technologies. And so those two things, AI first actually means human first, and change management is really innovation readiness.
Cliff, could you go a little bit more maybe into how you see this innovation readiness and concept? How do you see AI and automation really reshaping roles in the organization, from recruiters to HR business partners to other aspects of the roles as we know them today?
Sure. And I can give you a few examples that I really like to talk about that I think we're starting to see come true. As I made these predictions probably 18 months ago in a couple different articles that I wrote. And one is, let's look at recruiters and sourcers, right? Which is a really important role. And first, let me talk about the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD that you hear in the ethos of our domain and even outside of our domain. The first thing that you should know is the value of human work is going to increase if you're using artificial intelligence in the right way, ethically, responsibly, with great governance and great thought and care. So it should. So when you look at a recruiter and sourcer role, which in my view, and I called it a couple of years ago, that title is already gone. It still exists, obviously. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but the title is gone because the role is going to change significantly. You add AI into a recruiting role, give them access to deep automation, far better intelligence than they've ever had. They become a talent architect, right? So they're working more strategically with the business units to say, don't just come to me with a transactional, I have a role, fill it. I want to create a product or service. I want a different go-to-market strategy for something. What roles do I need? What skills do I need? Go find that for me and help me strategize how to develop my operation before we start to deliver. And then delivery becomes a known quantity. So that's really important. Other roles, and one that I like to mention because it's just a common one we all work with, is project managers, right? So project management in itself. A version of that role becomes a business enablement role. So project managers are going to go away. I mean, again, the skills are still there, but they're applied differently. Why? Because no longer is it going to take 9 to 12 months to develop a pilot or service or product. You're talking about 9 to 12 days with agents. So it happens very quickly. What that means is you need to enable the business in the right way, strategically align on what the outcomes are, not all of them, but some of them, get the resources, understand the skills involved, build that tool, and then go experiment, what we talked about before. So business enablement becomes a huge piece of, okay, how do we then scale that across the business? Which is why building a practice is so important, because it becomes repeatable. See how these work all hand in hand. One other role that I think is really important that we can mention is, this could be a recruiter sourcer. It could actually be someone from your HRIS or HRIT. As these agents and Gen AI becomes more prevalent inside our enterprise spaces, automations become the key to making them work right. So automations engineer, I mentioned that a couple of seconds ago, is probably one of the most highly sought after roles, which means a person that sits back and says, I'm going to look at the landscape of artificial intelligence. It could be Gen AI, it could be agents, which can run autonomously and do some low-level decision-making. How do I string those together to create these experiences that are going to deliver for the business, right? Ultimately. So automations engineer is the person that is crafting that and delivering on that and working closely with the business. So somebody has to curate all these AI things, the intelligence, the automations themselves, the connectivity. We use MCP, Model Context Protocol, to connect agents together, right? Somebody has to be doing that. It's going to transform into something that looks like what I talked about.
Excellent. So we can dispel the myth that humans are going away.
They're not going anywhere.
And it's humans and machines, humans and agents collaboratively working together as a team. Venu, you mentioned how excited we are for the upcoming launch in November. I know we're going to invite the audience maybe to come back to an episode in the future, and we'll touch on the things that happened to get to the final stages of the initiative and this phase of it and what happened after go live. I know, though, we've talked about that there are already many lessons learned. You touched on some of the things from a change and adoption standpoint. What would you say, though, that you've already learned as an organization about what worked well and what might you do differently in the future?
I touched upon it a little bit ago, but the biggest lesson learned is that this is a journey. And the November 10th go live is step number 1 of a multi-step journey. So lesson number 1 is the fact that when you're looking at your first go live, whether you want to call it MVP or whether you call it your most lovable product or whatever name you want to call it, be pragmatic about what are the key things that you want to achieve in your first go live. Because if you try to do too much all at the same time, all together, you lose on the innovation thread that is going to come in at a later point. You lose out on the concept of the journey that you want to go along with your product team and your strategic partners and so on and so on. So lesson number 1 is be pragmatic about what you want to achieve in your first go live. Number 1. Number 2, continuously improve, and again, do it in a very quick manner. Cliff spoke about quick experimentation, and that is something that we are going to do after the initial go live. How quickly can we start enabling new capabilities, new features, experiment, learn from it? If something doesn't work, you turn it off. If something works, you continue to work on it. So that experimentation, the muscle memory to continue to quickly experiment, decide on how you're going to use it, is something that we want to build. And that is a lessons learned as well. So those are some of the things that we are trying to do once this main go live completes.
I'm going to add to that a little bit because I think that's a really important principle, is understanding that, and I'll say it out loud, not that Venu was avoiding it, but failure is actually part of the plan, right? And when you experiment. And I think that when you look at leadership like Venu and at Cisco as a whole, innovations in their DNA, and maybe that's not your organization, but you can make it somewhat part of your organization by understanding that failure is going to be okay. It's an opportunity to learn, and you can iterate very quickly doing that.
Cliff, one of the things that you've also mentioned, having had a front row seat to Cisco's journey from the beginning, is the fact that they gave themselves a bit of space, that they didn't define so rigidly all of the outcomes and the business case, the ROI. They gave themselves metrics to adhere to in terms of achieving the strategy and get sponsorship and support for the initiative, but that they're still writing the story as they go a little bit. I'd love your perspective on that for the audience as well.
Sure. And it just goes back to what I was saying, right? When you think about innovation, the thing that you can't do is define every single outcome. Because then what you're doing is you're trying to force the innovation into that bucket. You define the direction you want to go. So directionally, here's the outcomes that we want to have. And they might be somewhat precise or specific because you're looking to measure against that. But that's the important piece. It's not if we don't meet that, we failed, right? We met part of that. If I went into an organization right now and said, how much of this process do you want me to change? And they say, well, we want to change 100% of it. We want it to work the first time out of the gate. Like, does anyone believe that's really going to happen? But if I came in and said, I can change 40% of what you do today, make you 40% more efficient, and that gets you onto the journey. And then eventually in the next iteration, which is 30 to 60 days later, you're 60%, then you're 80%, then you might be 100%. Now you've built up that. But if you start with that, we got to be 100% or we fail, I promise you're going to fail, right? So what Cisco has done, and I think is a great model for other organizations, say, let's just get the right direction, sense of direction as an organization, where we want to go, partner with the right technologies, the right advisory, and say, we're going to learn as we go, and we're going to be able to dynamically, and because we give ourselves the right to do it, to change the outcomes that we're looking for as we learn more. Because nobody knows what their ROI on any of this is going to be until they start doing it.
And I'll give a practical example to what Cliff just mentioned. When we're actually putting together the scope of what we were going to do from the November 10th Go Live perspective, we made a conscious decision that the onboarding journey, that is once the candidate accepts the offer till day one when they show up for work, we wanted to keep it as is. Now, it may not be the right decision for every organization, but at Cisco, we made a decision that it was way too big for us to include it. And we wanted to first achieve our primary outcomes, and then we are going to tackle it next, right? So that is an example of what Cliff just spoke about, is not trying to do everything all at the exact same time. Take a direction and continue to work.
Great. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation and a lot of great insights for our audience. Maybe I'll wrap this up kind of asking you both, if you had one key takeaway for organizations that are looking to start on this journey and leverage intelligent talent solutions, what would that be? Venu, I'll start with you.
Sure. I touched upon it. Start with business outcomes and be pragmatic about your business outcomes. Technology is the easy one. It'll always happen, and there are multiple ways to make it happen. Start with business outcomes and clearly define business outcomes. The reason why I say this is when we started the journey at Cisco, even before Deloitte came to the picture, we already had a document of all the requirements fully captured and broken down into multiple sections and prioritized based on critical, nice to have, and so on and so forth. So start with business outcomes.
So we were prepping for this earlier, and I went back and I wrote down a bunch of thoughts. I wrote down 5 things. It's hard to pick one. But I think the one that is probably the most important, I said it earlier, we'll say platform as a practice, but it is the idea of applied AI as a practice. No matter where you're starting that journey inside your organization, happens to be at Cisco from a talent acquisition perspective, and really creating talent acquisition as a revenue lever, right? Making sure that that's part of the outcome of this is sort of changing the attitude about TA and its impact on the business. But you build that practice in TA, and you're able to then apply that practice throughout the organization. If you think of it that way, that this isn't transactional, that you're not just acquiring a technology, you're adopting it. Adoption means bring just what I think of it in a familial term. It's coming into your whole family, your whole ecosystem. And you have to give it the right access and the right care and the right curation, right? And the right thought and the right leadership around it. And that's what a practice is. And so if you think of these technologies as practice bound, you will have more success with them than not.
Well, this has been a very engaging conversation. Thank you, Cliff, for the vendor perspectives and the broader talent acquisition and marketplace trends. And Venu, thank you for sharing so much insightful, pragmatic knowledge about Cisco's implementation journey. I think the lessons learned, the future predictions, these are all really insightful things that our audience will be able to take to heart. And it's clear that talent intelligence combined with innovative strategies, with a focus on business outcomes and innovation readiness, will really transform how organizations are competing for talent. So thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Venu. And thank you all for listening in to us today.
That'll do for today, Capital H listeners. Thank you so much for joining. And a big thank you to Kirstin, Venu, and Cliff for sharing their insights on turning talent intelligence into action. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, hit that like and subscribe button, and reach out to us on social media with your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.